Hello everyone, good evening. And though it's not Chanukah yet until the weekend, but the best way to experience anything is to enter into it with properly prepared. So it's always appropriate. That is why when Moses, one of the wise suggestions or actually ordinances that he instituted was that 30 days before a holiday, you begin studying about the holiday. Not just to know the laws, but it's like if you're going to have you have a special appointment, you have a job interview, or once in a lifetime interview, you're not going to just enter without proper preparation. At least most people wouldn't. You'll do your homework and your research. So if one wants to truly appreciate an experience that's precious, the more you prepare, the better the experience is. Even though this sounds so logical, it doesn't always work out that way because we cram or we underestimate, or maybe above all, we may not even appreciate the experience itself. So often we miss great opportunities because we really didn't know how to appreciate the moment. It's like standing in a moment amidst a beautiful scene in nature, and or other things that happen in our lives. Sometimes you miss the greatest magical moments because you didn't have the tools to appreciate it. And other people, they look at something, they already have been trained and acclimated themselves, so they experience it differently. So the question is, how many great opportunities have we missed? I'm not trying to depress anybody more than they're depressed already, but you want us to always wonder if you maybe everything you've always prayed for came your way, but you missed it because you didn't have the eyes to see it or the ears to hear it. This is true, especially in relationships. I remember a couple I met many years ago. It was maybe 7-8 years ago, and they came to speak to me. They were seeing each other seriously, and then for some reason they really felt they're not compatible, and it all fell apart. When I met with them, to me they seemed very compatible, and I thought it was a perfect shidduch, a perfect match. But you can't get involved and change the order of nature. So I just smiled and I said my piece, and they both went their separate ways. Ended up both having pretty miserable next 3-4 years. And lo and behold, 2 years ago, they got married. They re-met. And I asked them, I said, so what happened exactly? They said each of them were busy. He was starting a business. She was busy in some other distraction. And they couldn't even see each other. And definitely weren't able to see. I'm not, thank God, the happy ending. But you realize from that, and I asked them, I remember this question, I asked them, so what could have been said to you 7-8 years ago that would have perhaps had you open your eyes? And they said, really nothing. Because when someone's blind, they're blind, and that's that. So, I know we always like to have good lessons. Sometimes you just have to have the humility and openness to perhaps know that you don't know everything. That's a good beginning. As soon as you know you don't know, you're already at least open to possibility of seeing something differently. The worst thing is when one's convinced absolutely 100% of something, and they may be completely off or completely clueless. So I just say that as an interesting opening. So when we enter Chanukah has a very powerful lessons and powerful messages, and often you can miss it if you don't really understand what the message is. Now we all know the general story is pretty obvious, or many people know it, that several thousand years ago, or as the joke goes, they wanted to kill us, we were saved, let's eat. That's how it goes. So that's what most people are aware of holidays. But as a little deeper than that, Chanukah, it was a story with, this time it was the Greeks, sometimes the Egyptians, sometimes it's the Babylonians. I've never told you this story. I was once in a cafe. It was during the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is the saddest period of the Jewish calendar. So it's not traditional not to do weddings then, and not to play music, and not to unnecessary leisure. Those that make weddings know that the dates of the holiday calendar can be quite formidable. So the 3 weeks is one period in time. And I was at this cafe, and a guy sitting next to the table to me says to the waitress, how come there's no music in this cafe here? It was a kosher cafe. So she says, it's the 3 weeks. And he says, what's the 3 weeks? So his friend sitting with him says to him, 3 weeks, you're the son of a rabbi. You don't know what the 3 weeks is? The Babylonians destroyed the first temple, then the Romans destroyed the second temple. So I remember He said, I don't get involved in politics, please, It's politically correct. He doesn't get between the Romans and the Babylonians and the Palestinians and so on and so forth. So some people are not interested in the politics, but the fact is that the Greeks, this time it was the Greeks, during this time of the Second Temple, and they were very much challenged by the Jewish attitudes, which was, for some reason, we always get under the skin of every nation that we've been around, and maybe because we refuse to conform. Conformists like conformists. They don't like non-conformists. That's my take on anti-Semitism, at least short take. Obviously, it's more complicated than that. And they went to battle. The Greeks, interestingly, were not interested in killing the Jews. Let's say like Haman and the Persians were in the Purim story, or like Hitler. They were interested in destroying the spirituality of the Jews. When we say in the Chanukah prayer, we'll say that they wanted to make us forget that it's God's Torah. Which means remove us from following God's commandments. They had no problem. The Greeks, as we know, were quite intellectuals, and they preached morality. They could not relate to and couldn't stand, actually, that the Jews insisted that morality has to do with God. So morality is fine, but why do you have to call it God's morality? And when it came to Torah, no problem. Torah is wisdom, intellectual stimulation, philosophy, theology. Why do you have to call it God's Torah? Why does it have to be divine? That was the thing they bothered most. So the way it's expressed is that they were really challenging the soul of Judaism as opposed to the body. Like Hitler didn't really care spiritual, not spiritual. He just didn't like Jews, period. And they tried to exterminate all of us. It would make no difference whether you were spiritual or not spiritual. But so Chanukah was a war over the soul, basically. And that's why we celebrate Chanukah not by any other way, by lighting flames. What does lighting candles have to do with the Greek challenge? Because a flame is symbolic of spirit. Flame is the closest approximation to what the soul looks like, which I shall soon discuss. And therefore, the main primary celebration on Chanukah is through lighting flames. It's like a symbol of the soul, a symbol of subtlety. And of course, answering the big question of the Greeks, which again I will answer during this class, hopefully. So, to understand and appreciate Chanukah, especially what's relevant to our lives today, because that's what it comes down to. We have busy lives, we have a lot of people competing for our attention. Why should Chanukah be important to me? So we all know the traditional reason is because this is our tradition, and if we don't keep it and we don't pass it on to our children, who will? But that's not really a really sufficient answer. That's a good answer that feeds on our guilt and feeds on our obligation. I'm not suggesting it's per se a bad thing, but if you want to be passionate about something and you want to really connect it, especially if you're somewhat of a skeptic, to just say we do it because they've been doing it till now, somewhat is empty. The truth is, it is irrelevant. It's not only relevant, the challenge is, and I find this my challenge is, how do you present this as indispensable? How can you make Chanukah indispensable? Because if it's indispensable, then it's not just out of guilt or out of obligation that we're going to keep it. It's because we see it's a powerful message and how it can help our lives, our relationships, our personal issues. Which, as you know, if you've been coming here, been hearing these classes, it's always been my focus. Because, there are many classes that talk about maybe the intricate details of the laws of Chanukah and how you light a candle and what wicks you can use and what kind of menorahs you can use, whether you light it from right to left or left to right. Which is all very nice and important, but that's the mechanics. Mechanics you can learn elsewhere. I try to focus on the soul behind it all. What message does it have? What lessons does it have? How does it answer our most compelling questions? And of course, different traditions, Chanukah is Chanukah, each holiday, each chapter in the Torah, each part of Jewish tradition has its own particular message. So maybe a good way to begin is an interesting episode, a story that happened. I've been blessed to meet many beautiful people in my life, and hopefully we'll meet many more. So I've intersected the trajectory of many lives, and it's always beautiful to see people. Of course, not every part of our lives are always beautiful, but the overall journey of a person's life, in my view, is a majestic journey. And even the challenges that we have to go through, not to try to make it poetic when we go through dark times, but nevertheless, every journey, in the big picture, it deserves dignity and deserves to be respected. Especially the challenges, because we don't know what people go through. Most people have friends they call good weather friends. When everything is going nice, your friends are around. Very few people, their friends, are there when it's not so comfortable or not so pleasant. But to be able to participate in a person's journey is really to see the majesty of a soul traveling through the trials and tribulations and twists and turns of life. And so, thank God, I've been blessed to be part of many such journeys. And and most of them are very quiet. They're not ones that get headlines or movies are made about them and books are written. It's the quiet little journeys that you see people going through their challenges of their lives, or their mother and father dealing with a newborn child. The thousands of hours that are not documented, except those that are at the moment, are really the most important moments of life. The moments that have shaped you and me and everyone are moments that no cameras were there when that happened. That's when your mother and father held you when you were crying. Those quiet moments, non-dramatic, where lives are changed for good or for bad. And when you appreciate that part of life, that's when you really realize how many things are distractions and what's important. Now I see it through the eyes of my own children as they're bringing up their own children. You have a perspective to step back. It's a little different when you have you're one generation back. You can watch it much more, in a much more appreciative way. And maybe because you're not center stage anymore. But the bottom line is you do see life in a certain way. You see the whole beauty of how children being shaped and how they grow and they go through every little details. They're just the little games they play. But it accumulates into a story, into who you and I are. So for me, it was always an underlying message, and appreciating really people's lives is to help people understand that despite what's going on the surface, on the veneer level, that beneath the surface there's always deep beauty. And sadly, the hardest part is to recognize that. Because when you get consumed or obsessed with something ugly or something hurtful, on an external level, it's very hard to dig deeper, because you get that's what is consuming you. Someone says something, insults you, some other experience, and the real secret to life is having the ability to access your own inner strengths. The problem is it's a catch-22 situation, because when you're feeling demoralized, or you're feeling down, or broken, or hurt, you don't feel the strength to access your own strengths. Which, like you see, just as an example, when you see athletes, or anyone, or musicians, or artists, or anyone that's in training. Everyone needs a coach, even not in training. One of the good things of a good coach, of a good support, is that those moments when we have our psychological funks, when we get into a funk, when we feel down or we feel lack of confidence, even with great talent, everybody goes through such moments. What a good coach, a good friend can do, or a good mentor, is help you access your own inner strengths that are there, but for some reason are unable to access. So it's really the key. If we can teach each other how to access that at will, it would solve a lot of our problems. I know we'd like to just will away all our problems, but that's ridiculous. That's not happening. Life is not about the magic. Life is about knowing there are challenges, there are problems, but knowing as well that you have every moment you have at your disposal resources and tools, a tool chest. You just have to know how to access it. And as I said, the hardest time to access it is when you're weak. So that's why we need each other to help lift each other up in those type of moments. So I remember one of many stories, but this one particularly struck me as I was thinking about this class tonight. I remember a young woman, I guess in her late 20s. I don't know if it's young today, late 20s, young or old, depends who you ask. People that age always feel they're old. If you're like 40, you don't think 28 is old. But I remember this woman came to see me. She was at this class, and they wanted to speak privately. So we met in my office, and she was telling me about her life, which was not an easy life, living in a very dysfunctional home. Privileged, she had all that she needed financially and materially wise, but psychologically a big mess. And maybe it was interdependent. And she's trying to make way of her life, and she had gone through many different so-called systems, different Jewish systems, other systems, looking for some nurturing, a home basically, spiritual home. And we were talking. So I said to her something which to me is obvious, but it was not obvious to her. I said to her, the Kabbalistic teachings write that each of us has within us both a unique song and a unique personality, a unique glow. A unique glow. And when we're born, it's very obvious. As soon as you come out to your mother's womb, you enter this world, that glow and that song is there. Which is why you see a child has a certain innocence, they exude a certain radiance. It's pure. Now, who doesn't want to hug a child, for example? And they just have that type of like unjaded, almost like freshly fallen snow. When you wake up in the morning, you see freshly fallen snow. It has a certain, no matter how old you are, it turns you back into a child. It's like going to, an ice cream shop or something. And the snow is white, pure, until, of course, people wake up and they start walking and treading on it. And suddenly this pure white snow becomes darker and darker, and then it becomes a mess, and then it's just you want to get rid of it because it's gotten so defiled. So in many ways, that's exactly how we are all born, with that type of glow, that type of radiance. I can't resist telling the Chelam snow joke. I maybe should save it for the next snowstorm, but might as well tell it. So in Chelam, the city of Chelam. Chelam is this town in Poland. They say were wise people, but the neighbors were always resentful of them, so they created this whole folklore, these fables, these ridiculous jokes about the people of Chelam and their famed stupidity. The equivalent of, some people call them Polish jokes, or I don't want to sound sexist, or blonde jokes. Have all these type of categories. I don't believe in all these stereotypes, but anyway, the Chelam story, the one I wanted to share, is with the snow. One night actually, the snow fell. There was a beautiful snow that blanketed the whole town of Chelam. So Chelam has like all these little shtetls. People wake up at different hours. So Yankel was always the first one to wake up at 5 a.m. He's already getting up. He looks out the window. What a beautiful snow! He says, it's sad to see. It's sad to disturb the snow. Maybe I can convince Shmerel, who wakes up at 5:30, and tell him, let's not go out today. Let's stay indoors and just let the snow, may retain its pristine look. Okay, Shmerel says the same thing. Okay, no problem. But Shmerel says, our next door neighbor Hirschel is getting up at 6 o'clock. I have to tell him as well. Okay, so begins this type of like a chain thing from porch to porch. Beautiful snow. Let's not go out. Everyone's great. So now we already have 6 or 7 people. They're all in control. They're making sure whoever wakes up. No one's walking out today. The snow is going to be pure. Okay, so far so good, right? But then Herschel says to Yankel, 1 second, the rabbi is getting up soon. He gets up at 7. He has to go pray. Can't tell him to stay at home. He has to go to the synagogue. Okay, so they all put their heads together. What do you do? What do you do? We can't cancel his prayer service. We can't disrespectful to the rabbi. We don't want to disturb the snow. So they came up with a brilliant idea. At 8 o'clock, Yankel and Shmerel were seen walking in the snow carrying the rabbi to the synagogue. Basically, that was their solution. So the rabbi didn't end up making the footsteps. Instead, there were 2 other steps. This is one of the chalms. This is the way problems are solved, You could think of many psychological lessons that you can derive from this. Anyway, I was telling this woman this about that each of us has this inner glow and inner song, and suddenly she bursts out in tears, which I wasn't expecting, but I understood why. And she said, it's so beautiful. Nobody ever told me such a thing. Not my mother, not my father. I never heard such a thing before. Everyone's been telling me, I have to do this type of therapy and that type of therapy, fix this, fix that, overlook this, forgive this one, stuff like that. No one ever told me that I have it all inside of me, that I have this beautiful thing that just got concealed. And I realized at that moment, what I took for granted is not such, most people don't take for granted. And I since obviously realized that many people don't know this fact, or they don't believe it, even when they hear it. Because what we know about ourselves is what we were told, or what we convinced ourselves, or what a series of events have so-called confirmed. But to have that given, that you are fundamentally a unique, and you have a beautiful song inside of you, that only you and only you can sing, and you have a beautiful glow inside of you that only you can give off. No one else has this glow. It's not something that is just a given. And when we hear it, it resonates. We all love to hear it because it's beautiful to hear. Not just for that reason. The question is, Is it true? Or is it just beautiful to hear? Now, I can tell you, I can't go ahead and prove it to you, because how do you prove something that is not obvious to the naked eye, or is not, you cannot see? But let's put it this way. One could say through experiential proof, as opposed to empirical proof, it can be demonstrated, because there are people who are quite aware of this, and it changes your life when you know this. Because essentially it means that you are indestructible. That no matter what happens, that glow in that song never disappears. All it can do is go undercover and get concealed. And above all, get concealed by you and your own lack of confidence in yourself. So when I think about Chanukah, and Chanukah is the festival of lights, and we will begin next Saturday night lighting the first flame, and then progressively growing each night, another flame. What is a flame? You look at a flame, it's a very fascinating phenomenon. It is not very powerful, literal sense. Yes, we know fire is powerful, but one little flame doesn't look very powerful, and yet is the only thing on earth that can dispel darkness. If you have dark room, physically dark, there's no way to get rid of the darkness. There's no shovels, no tools that you can get rid of darkness with. The only way is you have to bring in a light, and then the light, the darkness dispels automatically. This is not just physically so, it's also spiritually so, and psychologically so. So light is just a metaphor. How do you dispel darkness? In the psyche. If you're in a dark mood, if you are in a somber or a type of despondent place, how do you eliminate that? So today we look for all kinds of tricks. There are people who give us pills and all kinds of medication to try to get rid of these type of darkness, which essentially is the equivalent of taking a pill and the pill will suddenly make a dark room light. Do you think that can work? The pill can make you believe maybe it's not dark and you think you're walking around the light, maybe because it plays around with your mind and your awareness. A person is drunk enough they can think that it's light when it's really dark. But just like in the physical world, nothing can eliminate darkness except light. In the psychological world, the same is true. And you have far less people teaching you how to bring light into your life than those that are teaching you how to get rid of the darkness. Now, I'm not suggesting that under certain circumstances, clearly there are things called clinical depression or other dark states that medication can definitely somewhat minimize, weaken its effects. But that alone is never sufficient to really create a plan, a positive drive in your life. It may weaken the impact of any type of negative feelings that may overwhelm a person. But then comes the main work, which is how do you give a person light? What is the equivalent of light on the psychological level? So if you think about it from that perspective, Chanukah is literally that. That's what it is. It's a celebration of light. So its deeper lesson is about how do we access light in our lives? And what is light anyway? In the physical sense, we understand what a light is. You turn on a light bulb, there's a sun, there's a moon, there are torches, there are flashlights. We've got all kinds of sources for light, headlights, and so on. What is the equivalent of light in psychological terms? So there's a verse that is associated with Chanukah. The verse goes in the book of Proverbs. It says like this: K'ner mitzvah, the Torah ar. The ner mitzvah is compared to a ner, a candle, and Torah is compared to ar, which is light. So what is light in the psychological sense? So let's put it simple English. Light is clarity. Confusion would be associated with darkness, and clarity would be associated with light. When you're in the dark, so to speak, you don't know what's happening. You can be taken advantage of. You can make big mistakes. No different than someone who's wandering about and in a dark room and they have no clue where they are. So psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, darkness really means essentially a form of ignorance, a form of concealment, confusion, doubts. These are all associated with dark states of being. And light would be the antithesis to all that, would be clarity, would be direction, would be wisdom, would be knowledge. Anything that is illuminating, that helps us understand and clarify something. Purely on a even medical level, A person may have symptoms, but until they don't identify what the real root of a problem is, one is in the dark, and you could be in pain, God forbid, or suffer other symptoms. And what you're looking for is the light, the equivalent of light, not physical light. In this case, it's clarity to find out what really is going on. When you say somebody's an expert or someone's a professional in any given area, basically it's someone that has more clarity, more experience, more knowledge about a particular subject, and then can illuminate us who have less knowledge. Which is why you go to an expert who can advise and can look at a situation that the naked eye may not be able to discern and identify what is going on, and someone with a trained eye can see. So in that simple sense, that's really what the celebration of light is. But if you take it a step further, it obviously gets a lot deeper than that, because if we're so simple, why is it that we just can't access it? You could say, look, my life, something's not working, so I know I'm in the dark because I have no idea what to do. Let me go find light. And why do we have so many problems then? So one issue, of course, is what I said earlier, because we are our own worst enemies, and we contribute to the darkness by doing things that just make it darker, not lighter. So not only don't we go for advice or we don't get clarity, we start doing things on our own that by the time we go for advice, we've gotten so entangled it's almost impossible to get out of it. In other words, if you were able to nip a problem in the bud, that would be one thing. But often, by the time you finally realize you have to do something, it's such a mess that it's almost impossible to untangle. That's one issue. Another issue is we don't really have an understanding of what we're conscious of, and what we're conscious of, what we're not conscious of. If you don't have a standard of what is clarity, you can convince yourself that ignorance is knowledge. I'm sure we were all required reading in high school was 1984 by George Orwell. So those of us of the middle age category, so we read 1984 before 1984 happened, like in the 70s and so on. So we thought when 1984 comes, the doomsday. Now we're long after 1984, and some people say that's the world we're in. So as you all remember the theme, George Orwell's book, which was really some out of a loose story about communism, was this the future of the world where everybody is basically just conforming to guidelines that have nothing to do with reality or truth. It's complete mind control. And the classic lines there is that they train people, war is peace, love is hate, truth is lies, this whole thing. And you're literally convinced that everything that was true is a lie, and so on. Essentially completely transforming people's instincts and natural standards. Of course, love plays a big role there until they eliminate that too. So, you know the book, right? You know the ideas in the book? And it became a classic as an example of classic brainwashing. Some say that we live in a world like that today, except it's not so blatant, because people do have certain freedoms, and some say we don't have any freedoms at all. I'm not going to get into the debate. I'm not a conspiracy guy, so I'm not going to go into that thing. But there's no question that we are impacted. The question whether we're totally brainwashed or not is another story, but that we're impacted by the media. And the blind leading the blind, there's no question about that. Our standards are based on what we have been exposed to. They say by the time you're age 20 in the Western world, the average man or woman by age 20 has seen or heard or read 1 million advertisements. 1 million. So what's the impact of 1 million advertisements on our psyches, on our standards? I've shared this story here. I remember when my nephew, my brother's oldest boy, he was just maybe 10 months old, he was just crawling around, and my brother met with me. We were talking about, we were doing some planning an event, so we were discussing what we're going to discuss, what topics and so on. And usually in these cases I always find my topics from events that are happening around me, so my little nephew provided us the topic. What happened was, I was sitting in the office, so by accident, inadvertently I pressed the remote and the TV went on. The big screen. And this child, who I should have mentioned, up till that moment, one of the wildest kids you'll ever meet, but in a good way. My office is like a mecca for babies because it's full of papers everywhere. So this kid made a mess. I can't tell you. Papers were everywhere. My brother kept apologizing and so on because he was running around and crawling around. Kids. And I said, leave it alone. It's fine. I actually liked to see it. First of all, it was a good excuse to maybe get rid of all my garbage anyway. This way you just think you need everything until somebody reminds you that you really don't need it. So this was a reminder that I don't need everything, and it was an opportunity to make a cleanup. But besides that, I also, for some reason, I'm not a believer that one has to constrain children. I don't mean constrain them from doing something dangerous or destructive, but there's a certain free abandon. Let him go for it. He's going to have plenty of conformity to deal with when he gets older. So it might as well be a free spirit at this point. We don't have to accelerate the process. Anyway, so I turn on the TV while this kid is doing everything, and magic. Actually, the opposite of magic. Suddenly, this little active child, nothing was suppressing him, froze in his tracks, sat down, and was just staring at the screen. It was so chilling. I remember my brother and both of us, because you saw right before our eyes, life and death. In the psychological sense. This a live child suddenly froze, just staring. 10 seconds. It wasn't even 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds. And my brother said, shut it. So I shut it. And the boys still kept staring, because the screen, till you don't know really what it is when you're a baby, until another 10, 15 seconds, and they went back to playing. And I remember saying to myself, okay, and this became a major topic that I spoke about that weekend, I said, this was just 10 seconds, 15 seconds that he froze. What would have happened if I kept it on for another 15 minutes? Or 15 hours, and turn it to 15,000 hours? Whatever the amount is, 6 hours a day, or 5 hours a day, today with the internet, Facebook, I don't know. All these things. What actually would be happening to his soul and to his mind if 10 seconds could be so numbing? What's the accumulation of millions or hundreds of thousands of seconds, or whatever the number is? And I'm not here to fire and brimstone attack on television. I'm not even speaking from a religious perspective at all. I'm talking about from a human psychological perspective. I don't think any studies have been made about this. I know from time to time we get a scientific declaration that we have to lower the amount of hours that a child is exposed to TV. I'm not even getting to what the programming is. Even if this was, I don't know, what's the purest TV there is? Dr. Seuss? I don't know. I don't even know. We used to have Felix the cat when we were kids. That was just a cat. That just, it was as G-rated as it gets. I'm not even getting into the programming and the messages and so on. Just the mere fact that a child that's been running around is suddenly frozen in the space, to me that's worse than anything. So what does that do? And I was reading the other day, interesting thing, that with all our technology, if we did not preserve our bridges, our cities, our photographs, even digital data, within a certain amount of years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it's all gone. It's all exposed to the elements, exposed to weather and uncontrolled conditions. It's all gone, even digital, because digital is also, at the end of the day, it's being stored somewhere. It's not just, people think cyberspace means it's invisible. It's invisible to the eye, but it doesn't mean it's stored. And the only thing that has that prevailed over the ages, you know what? Are the ancient engravings in stone and in caves of our ancestors thousands of years ago. That has never been affected by any of the elements. So, and we call this progress. Now, I'm not taking away about the power of technology. Don't get me wrong. I know that on a very basic level, longevity, medicine, so many other fields, we live in unbelievable times and unbelievable developments. But it's just interesting contrast to what we call preservation and what we consider to be lasting and what is really healthy, what's not healthy. Just some food for thought. I know I'm not going to convince anybody. I'm not even trying to throw out your gadgets and your televisions. But think about what it would do for your marriage if there was no television to escape to in your bedroom. So some people say it would destroy my marriage because I wouldn't have anywhere to escape to. So think about what that statement means. So what is that you're saying? That it's destroying it? Why? Because you're able to distract yourself. Maybe it would force to have conversations. How do you think about that? Just a plain conversation, two eyes staring at two eyes, without texts and without gadgets. To me, it sounds quite appealing. It's actually quite novel. You don't really hear about it so much. I mean, soon someone will patent probably that. Let's have a real conversation. Here's a place where you guys can have a real conversation. Let's say it's real. Reality TV. That also became a thing. It's reality. Anyway, a little social satire doesn't hurt. Obviously, I hope you understand that I'm not coming and advocating going back to the cave, to the cave age. What is it called? The Ice Age, the Cave Age, Stone Age. That was the right Stone Age. But but it's good to sometimes it's good to remind ourselves how brainwashed we are after all. And so to go back to what I was addressing about Chanukah, about light and so on and clarity, I think realizing that many of us have no clue what we really are made of, because we've been shaped by so many forces. And the question I always ask myself and everyone, I say, who are you? Who am I? The real honest answer is I have no clue who we are. We are, basically, you have to first eliminate all the forces that shaped us, that took this freshly fallen snow and distorted it and changed it. Now, the good news is it didn't really fundamentally change it, but it definitely concealed it. We are a product of many, many factors that people we need to satisfy, or we think we need to satisfy, we need to please. Then there's the whole, obviously, the media impact. That's what I was saying, that each of us are exposed to a million advertisements by the time you're age 20. It has to play with your psyche. There's no way it doesn't. There's no way that advertisers are spending billions of dollars if they're not changing our minds. Why would you do that? There's no way you go into a supermarket and they have it all figured out, what level the food is, what colors. Even the subliminal, invisible things you don't even realize are there. Not just in the casino, where there's oxygen pumping and there's no clocks. Every place you go, if they have their marketing and their strategy in place, they've got you covered. Now, so we're being impacted all the time. It's not always for the bad. There are things that assault us, but that's the business of the world. And now with being tracked online, it's all really coming to focus exactly what you think you need. And it comes down to, are any of us really independent individuals? I don't think we're very independent. And the only way you really would know is if you actually left your society and went off into the wilderness and not have any impact of any of these forces and really see what would emerge. Many of us couldn't handle it. We'd come running back because we're addicted to this menu of options, so to speak. Look, I'm a hardcore New Yorker. I lived there my whole life. I go to another city, and I've been to many, traveling and speaking and so on. And when they, after 9 o'clock, you can't even make a phone call. Where in New York, you begin making phone calls after 9. So I remember Cincinnati, this place, and everything shuts down. People go to sleep, which is beautiful. But I was like going up a wall. I realized how addicted I am to action. Nightlife, forget about it. With the nightlife, let's say, 1 second, nightlife is 6 o'clock, then 8 o'clock is nightlife. And some people don't even know who what the late show was. For us, it's not a late show. It's when you get home, basically, an early show. But the point is that I'm quite aware of the contrast. And I don't know if it's a healthier life here, to be honest. It's just everything is accessible, available. You have insomnia, 4 o'clock in the morning, no problem. There's always a cafe or something. You could always go buy a banana or buy flowers. I mean, there's everything is available all the time. So I don't know how natural that is either. Sometimes I think to myself, it'd be nice to hear that some fruits are out of season. There's no such thing anymore. Everything's in season all the time. So we're completely out of touch with nature altogether. So you don't even know which, everything's in season. So the point I'm making here is that it's very hard to really define ourselves. And I find this, after all the jokes, setting all the jokes aside, the real point I want to make is that the impact that it has in our lives is deep and dramatic. Because what it does is, it doesn't allow us to really access ourselves. That's the point. If life was beautiful and you're living in a 1984 world and everything is great, the Brave New World, another book of the same nature, Aldous Huxley, and everything is really working well, okay, so you could say, listen, I don't mind being brainwashed, at least I'm happy. Some people would have a problem with that too. But life isn't working so well. And all you got to do is look at families, look at relationships, look at the mess, look at children. I mean, all the main things in life are not working so well in our world. So then, what are you left with? You're left with the veneer, or you're left with the image of who you think you are, or what people think you should be, and very little to call upon within yourself when you really need these resources. So that's why I think pain and loss and being broken in this world is far harder than it was in the past. Because a few hundred years ago, they didn't have all these vehicles to distract themselves and keep you happy. People were exposed to the elements all the time. You worked on a farm all day in an agricultural society, and if the rain didn't come, you were left hungry. And you worked on a farm, and you ate from your own produce and from the own, but your bare hands. You didn't have energy that was doing the work for you. You had to do it yourself. Again, I'm not advocating that, but I could realize that a person like that, when they suffered, had far more natural tools to access. Because that's where the world, they lived in reality. We live in a very sugar-coated environment. So when it comes to real matters, the one that suffers most are the true issues in our lives. So I have no doubt, therefore, that relationships today and things like love, things that are truth, God, soul, happiness, all these are going to be the ones that are the greatest casualties in a world that has so many so-called smokescreens or numbers or whatever you want to call it. Cool, you got it. You're in a bad mood. You go to your bedroom and you put on a TV and you try to entertain yourself. You got a quick solution. Does it really work? Yeah, it may put you to sleep. You may forget it for the night. It's like self-medicating. It's a type of like sleeping pill. Again, I'm not trying to advocate that everything about it is negative, but when you contrast it, the stark contrast to reality, real life, the life of, as I said, the inner life of children, our inner lives are starving, in my opinion, as a result, and you see it everywhere. And most people have no clue that they're starving, because there's so many ways to distract yourself to think you're not, and that's a far greater problem. The Baal Shem Tov puts it this way. He says there's two types of darkness. There's a darkness, it's dark. The sun is set, it's dark outside. Fine. Then he says there's a thing called haster aster panai, a double darkness. It's a darkness that conceals the darkness, a concealing of the concealment. Okay, what happens then? Well, we call it today denial. That's what's called denial. That the concealer is concealing, something is concealing the concealment, so you think it's light. You don't think it's dark, which is far greater problem, because there's no help. Someone doesn't think there's a problem. I remember every time a couple call me and they say we have problems. So I always ask them, what does your husband, what does your wife say? Oh, he doesn't think we have problems. So I always say to myself, oh boy, then you got real problems. If you think there's a problem and he thinks there's no problem, then what? Someone is wrong. And it's usually the one that thinks it's a no problem is probably the one that's wrong, because to say that one person has a problem, it's complete delusion, usually not the case. You could say it's not, maybe it's exaggerated, but to say one person says that things are great and another person says things are terrible, so there's that Hasidic story of in the olden days in Russia. Those days, sometimes in very unbearable hot days, there was no air conditioning, so what they had was these cold basements and cellars where people would go down to for some relief, a little cool, to cool themselves off. So one day, tell me if it goes off, okay? So one day, it was a real hot day, but also when you go down there, it's very dark, because there's no electricity either, but it's cool. So at least choose light and heat, or cool and dark. Your call, depends whether you like heat or not. So this chassid goes downstairs into this basement, and the son says, it's so dark down here. And he hears a few other people say, don't worry, you'll stay here long enough, it won't be that dark. He said, that's exactly what I'm worried about. And he ran upstairs, because he couldn't stand the metaphor of that. And in Jewish philosophy and Hasidic thought, and different Jewish philosophical books, they talk about darkness. Is darkness only the absence of light, or does it have substance of its own? No, interesting question. And of course, the real question is not just on a physical level, but also on a psychological level. As I mentioned before, is darkness just absence of knowledge, or is it actually a force of its own? And the answer given is that there's two levels. That's always the answer in Judaism. It depends what level you're talking about. One level, it's only absence of darkness, of light, and the other is where it begins to assume its own personality. Psychologically speaking, everyone can relate to this following statement. A lot of problems begin at the absence of something else. But then when it begins to grow on you, and you continue to be deprived of whatever is absent, it suddenly becomes a monster of its own. And if it was nipped in the bud, as I mentioned before, and the void, the vacuum was filled early on, and the absence was filled, it would never become a monster. It would never become a problem. Many, many examples you can find in life for this. And it's a good way also to monitor or to gauge if you have an issue. What state is it in? Is it a state where something is missing, and that if you fill that gap, think of a person on a very basic level. Someone is extremely thirsty, and they go day after day and they're not drinking something. They are very vulnerable. So at that point, it's still absence of being quenched, right? So it's thirst. So at that point, all they really need is getting a drink of water. But if it continues to grow and they don't get a drink, they become more and more desperate. And when you get desperate, you're vulnerable. When you're vulnerable, anything can happen. And then someone offers you a drink that can be destructive, toxic. And you'll grab it, you won't think twice because you are so hungry, thirsty. So there you go. Something that was an absence of now has become a problem, objective problem, that now you got to get rid of the toxins inside of you. Now think of the same idea psychologically. A person, let's say their soul is hungry. Someone's missing something in their life. Lack of love. Lack of anything that we need. So in the beginning it's a lack. And if you were given it at an early stage, so once it becomes a monster of its own, now you're already focusing, now you're addressing a real problem. And think in your own lives, I'm sure you can find examples of this. And it's an interesting exercise because a lot of problems always begin. Obviously, if you can catch it early, that's the key. This is like, for example, we make a mistake in our lives. So the healthiest thing to do when you make a mistake is to fess up and to solve it quickly. Most of us don't do that. We are ashamed, embarrassed. So what we usually do is we cover up. And we hope it'll just go away. Sometimes it does. But sometimes it doesn't. And then you begin to forget what lies you said. So you need to create new lies. And the lies start mounting. And the strange thing about lies is that you don't remember what they are. So you don't always know what you lied and what you didn't lie. You got to type you need a record of it. The truth, you don't have that problem. Just tell it the way it was. So what happens is it starts accumulating the cover up, and now it becomes a monster of its own. And now to say, I really made a mistake is not just saying I made a mistake. I made a mistake and I lied about it, and I lied again, and I changed my whole story, and I changed 1,000 things to cover up that initial thing. This is called a big problem now. And think of it like a small infection. Okay, infection, you don't treat it. So you feel it goes away, you put some Band-Aid on, you cover it up or whatever, and it just begins to fester. So you have no clue, but meanwhile it's building until the point where it becomes a monster of its own. I mean, the list goes on of these examples of what we call the double darkness. So now, going back to the story of Chanukah, what's missing in all this is that we are not aware, because we've been programmed and brainwashed by many factors, starting with our parents, starting with our friends, our societies, our schools, everything around you is shaping you all the time. And if you're not shaping yourself, they're shaping you. If you're not influencing those forces, you're being influenced by them. That's how it is. The elements in nature are always shaping everything around it. It may not be obvious this moment, but it accumulates. And as a result, the biggest challenge is that it conceals the concealment, which means we have no clue that we have this inner glow and this song inside us. Now, there are moments in life where you will be reminded. It could be through music. Music is one of the big forces I'm a big believer in music therapy, in the sense where music touches you. Music is a reminder. It's not necessarily a healer, but a reminder for sure it is. You can be in a certain situation, you turn on a song, you lock everything out, and suddenly you're surrounded. It's like being underwater and you experience something. It transports you somewhere. For some people, it's other truths. You read books. It can be love and romance. It can be travel. It's looking for resonating experiences. What's a resonating experience by definition? Resonance means that something you hear or you see or you experience and it rings true. What's resonance? Resonance means there's, let's say, the technical and a frequency level in the sound and audio. Resonance means that there's some type of, let's say, what do they call it today? A pitch, like a fork, a sound fork, right? Where which many people, singers and others, use to get the right decibel to the right note, and a sound resonates and it shakes and it causes something to tremble or to quiver or to pulsate. That's what resonance is. Psychologically or personally, emotionally, resonance is when someone tells you a story and like inside you say, "Wow, that rings true." It resonates with you. Things that don't resonate. They just enter and you don't really hear it. Words from the heart enter the heart. Someone comes over to you, unless you're callous and really distracted or just completely narcissist, someone comes over and cries to you. You're a normal person and cries and opens their heart to you. It's going to usually affect somebody. You may not know what to do, but that's what it is. A sincere cry affects us. A sincere smile. Sincerity, what's affecting? It's resonant. You sense a truth. Now, we could be manipulated, of course. That's not relevant to the discussion because that's just simply because some people can manipulate. But the resonance is something that is undeniable. And especially over a period of time, you begin to trust someone that things resonate. If you have a mentor, if you have a friend, if you have a person you love, and you see time and again they're there for you, and they see time and again that the things they say, or the things they promise, or the advice they give, or just the silence even, the acceptance of you, and all that resonates. These things are very powerful experiences. These are reminders of who you really are. Now, if our parents did it right, and I'm sure many parents did it right to some extent, there's no perfection, they would have reinforced and validated again and again our inner value. Basically, your inner glow and your song. And as such, you would learn to build up enough confidence and basically have a compass by which to navigate, like an internal GPS, so to speak, where you could then constantly always recognize what resonates, what doesn't resonate. As it is, when we don't have that, what happens is then we really become susceptible and to whatever comes our way, which is why outside forces have such impact on us. In the case of that little boy, my nephew, I thought about it. He didn't have any control over this. It wasn't like he knew what a television was. He never saw television before, probably. But the power of imagery is so powerful that immediately captured him. It took control of his whole life. So here he was running about, but the images, which just shows you how powerful imagery is. Vision. It just captures us. And that's why it's such a good babysitter. Because it's basically a hypnotist. It hypnotizes us. Which tells you immediately what it's doing. It's really taking control of you. So, I guess a limited exposure, when you're in control, to some extent, some benefits. But its strengths are its weakness, obviously. So in his case, it wasn't like lack of validation, but if he would continuously be exposed to it, that would become the arbiter and the definer of what is valuable, whatever that image is telling him. Because that's more powerful than his own instincts. If I had it my way, I would have made sure, and actually this boy has grown up without a television in his house. And basically he's been able to develop, he's now 12 years old, and I just saw him the other day, and I remember the story always. I'll tell it to him one day when he gets older, because I want to see, the day when he starts moving over to the other side, what we call maturity and, or programmed maturity, so to speak. But basically, the less exposed to other forces in control, or demanding something from you, or hypnotizing you, or seducing you, the more he's going to be in control of what resonates, what doesn't resonate in his life. So basically, my friends, it's a simple ratio. The more forces that inundate us and control our attitudes, the less access you're going to have to your inner soul and to your glow and to your song. Simple as that. I know nobody likes to hear it so bluntly. We all like to have our cake and eat it too and say, why can't I have both? Well, you figure out how you're going to have both. I can't really tell you. I can just tell you this, that if you want to build your inner resources, you cannot allow the outer resources to be controlled by other forces. It just doesn't work. If you come to a point where you can find that inner light and inner glow, then you're far more controlled and you really can almost go anywhere. Nothing will affect you. But if you're not there yet, if you haven't built that inner confidence and inner strength, it would be like telling someone who's studying piano or some other instrument and wants to go out and play, you haven't yet mastered the art. You can't just suddenly go do something else. You have to master it before you can really go out there. So I'm not a believer that you have to keep someone constantly trapped in whatever lessons they're taking, but you have to master something. There's no other way but to focus on it. So we have Chanukah not 365 days a year, we have 8 days a year. And Chanukah is meant to be a story of our lives. It's meant to be the story of your flame and your glow, and your soul, and the nature of how it comes alive. So let's study a flame a moment, and you tell me if it doesn't resonate. They talk about resonance. And my suggestion is that when you light the flame, the first flame next Saturday night, and then the nights afterwards, spend 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half hour. It's actually a mitzvah to spend a little time by the flame, not just to light and run away. To bask in its glow, so to speak. But more importantly, to hear the story that the flames tell us. It's an expression of one of the Rebbes. Rabbi Jacobson would say that. Let's listen to the story that the flames tell us. And they tell a story. And the story is a very resonating one. So let's just look at a few properties of a flame and compare it to the properties of things we're exposed to on a daily basis. Okay. First thing about a flame, not in any particular order, I'll just go one thing at the next. Studying a flame. A flame is always flickering. It's restless. It's never in one place. Look at the material world. The material world is a dead world. Human beings are mobile. Soul is mobile. But matter, by definition, is dead. Unless you access its inner energy. So like a wick and a flame, think of the wick as the body and the flame as the soul. Think of the wick as the form and the flame as the function. Basically, matter on its outer level is a dead, unmoving world. When my nephew stopped moving and looking at the TV, he suddenly froze. He started dying. At least his spirit. So when you look at a flame, the first thing that it does is remind you that your soul is a flickering force, and it's healthy for it to have a certain measure of angst and a certain restlessness. That's satisfied with and not complacent with the status quo. So next time you're restless, even though we don't like restlessness because it leads usually to anxiety, but that's already when it goes too far. Angst and anxiety are not the same thing. I mentioned this many times. You don't need to be a heart cardiologist to know that if someone suggests that your heart is being measured as a straight line, it's a big problem. A straight line with a heart is not considered positive. It's considered death, actually. And what you want a cardiogram to look like is very restless. You want it to look like this, like a wave. You don't want it to be peaking and dipping disproportionately, but you don't want it like this either. So you want a life that's completely non-restless, then that's the wick. Flames are like this. A heartbeat is a symbol of the flame, as is the breath. Breath is also another symbol. Exhale, inhale. Contract, expand. It's called in Kabbalistic and mystical language, Rotze and Shuv, which means it runs and returns, yearns and returns. Tension resolution is a key ingredient in a person's life. Now, too much tension is like going too high. Too much resolution is going too low. But you don't want a straight line. A life of a straight line is not for the living. You want to have is a wave. And you want to have a wave that is balanced, and a flame is the perfect balance of that. Which is why when it comes to Chanukah and the laws of Chanukah, if you look at Chanukah, there's actually laws not just about how the flame should be lit, and what kind of flame. Can you light a torch, for example? How big is the flame? It's not that you have to light a small flame. But there's also laws about the wicks. What kind of wick can you use? Because the key here is not just the flame. The flickering flame is dependent also on the measure of how commensurate it is to the wick. For example, if the wick is too saturated, it will swallow up the flame. If the wick is non-combustible, like let's say a piece of metal, it won't burn. So you need something that is combustible, meaning that it's fitting to be lit. Some wicks are fitting and some are not. And then you need, obviously, the flame. So a big issue in this context, if you broaden the subject, is really measuring the balance in our lives. How restless and how resolved are you? And you really need a measure of both, pretty much equal measure of both. That one should never be resigned and satisfied, should always be reaching for more. The question is how much to reach for. Obviously you don't want to jump too far either, or else you burn out. And as you've seen some souls in our own generations, including some rock personalities who literally OD'd on their highs. You want a high, but you don't want it to be out of reach, that you can't return. So this is just one story of the flame. The story of restlessness, the story of life's movement. And when you look at the flame and think about that, that will give you a sense of where you're at, having that type of balance. And you see right there, from there, we're talking about looking at your inner glow as opposed to your outer. You know, some people will identify with what I've said in business terms. Some say, okay, in business I have a certain competitive side. I always want to make more money. I want to be more successful, more customers, more clients, or whatever, however you measure the success of your business. And then there's being at peace sometimes. You don't want to go crazy either. Just be so driven that you obsess and then become so anxious that everything overwhelms you. So it's true, we apply that type of measure in our businesses. Obviously, I'm talking about this not just in the monetary or material sense. I'm talking about far more in a personal and emotional sense. But just as an example, you could use that as an example. So that's one story with the flame, with the restlessness, with the wick, and the restlessness of the flame. There's the example, the story I've once told here about one of the Rabbis when he was a child. So he was playing on a ladder with other children. And they were all climbing up and down the ladder, kids. And all the other kids were afraid to climb to the top. They climbed halfway, they scurried down. He climbed all the way to the top of the ladder. Later, his grandfather asked him, why were you different than your other friends? They all were afraid, frightened, and you climbed right to the top. So he answered, Zayda, he said, which is grandpa. In Yiddish, he said, it's very simple. When they were climbing, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were. It frightened them. So they ran down. They were afraid. When I kept climbing, I kept looking up. So I saw how low I was motivated to climb higher. So you can imagine he grew into being some individual. But it's an interesting example. Because you think about life, you see, do we look up or do we look down? And I would submit that it depends who you're with. If you're hanging around people who are less accomplished than you, guaranteed that you're looking down. And it doesn't very much motivate you. As a matter of fact, you say, look how much I've done compared to these losers. Or compared to these people who've done less. Maybe that's a strong word. Whereas if you're in a company of people who are far more accomplished than you're looking up, that's pretty much a big motivator. Because you realize, hey, look what they did, look what I did. So, often we like to be around people less accomplished. It makes us less guilty, But winners like to be around bigger winners. Because they want to be motivated like that. So one makes you more complacent, the other makes you more restless. That's what a flame does. It licks the air. It reaches upward. Which brings me to the second thing in a flame, besides restless, that it's always reaching upward. It's the only physical substance that we can see with our eyes. There are others that we can't see, certain gases, that defies gravity. Nothing else defies gravity. Because as I said before, the closest approximation to your soul, or to your voice, your song, your glow, is a flame. And a flame is always looking upward, always reaching for something beyond itself. If we did not have eyes in our head, and if we did not have the ability to look up to the heavens, we would never send people into outer space. We spend billions of dollars, if not more, just to satisfy one thing, our curiosity. We see the stars. We see the planets. We see the moon. What's out there? Someone explain to me, why do we have to satisfy this curiosity? Can the money not be spent in better ways? Why don't we eradicate hunger on Earth before we want to know what's going on Neptune? But there's something about the human spirit that looks upward and then wants to climb the ladder. And yes, many secondary and incidental products were produced through NASA. We wouldn't have the type of shoes we have today. These aerodynamic shoes. We wouldn't have Velcro. We wouldn't have a whole list of products that were developed simply to help the people who went into outer space survive there. But that was not why the investment was there. That was already like secondary benefits. It was there to satisfy our curiosity. Because human beings want to know what's going on up there. They say about Hasidic sayings that on Behema, an animal has never seen heaven. You don't find animals looking to land on the moon. Cows, sheep, all the other livestock, wild animals, predators. They're finding what's going on Earth. They're not looking for new prey in outer space. They are satisfied. They're not building better homes. They have no beachfront properties. They have no cars. They have no fax machines or cell phones or iPhones. They don't really care. Human beings have this thing, we need to know what's going on by Yohand. So in a healthy way, that means that we are looking for the spirit of things. We're looking for something that is the unknown. When we know something, we always want to know what's behind the door, what's behind the curtain. So that's a second thing in the soul. A third thing about a flame is, as I discussed earlier, it automatically illuminates its surrounding. It's an illuminator. So here's a good question to ask yourself. Not an easy question to answer. It's not an easy question to ask either, frankly. Maybe because it's hard to answer. Do you illuminate the people that you come in contact with? Or do you do nothing? Or do you actually drain them? Like weaken them, darken them? Do you even know? Will anyone tell you? Because if someone's your real good friend, they probably won't tell you. And people who are not your good friend will tell you, but they may not tell you the truth either. So it's a good question, because there are people you're around almost always, every time. They make you feel better about yourself, more confident, more secure. There are other people who always make you feel bad about yourself. I guarantee that you have people who you turn to. You come with any enthusiasm and excitement, they'll always throw cold water and say, "Don't get so excited. You've been there already. You know that you're." They won't tell you maybe that you're a failure, but they're basically suggesting that. And often it comes as a projection. Misery loves company. So if you're going to be too happy, it may make me look bad. So you're not going to be too happy. I'm not going to be too happy, and let's just all feed each other this certain measure of despondency, and that's that. Someone recently told me they got engaged. They live in the Upper West Side, and she told me she couldn't believe it. All her friends are like sitting in mourning that she got engaged, that she basically abandoned them in the single glorified life, deified single life of the Upper West Side. So I said, "What? That did you call that friends? They're mourning your engagement, But sometimes that's what happens. You create your club. It's a comfort zone, and sometimes it's a comfort zone. We call it the Lonely Hearts Club. You want to call it, or like who's it that sings it? Billy Joel. That drinking a cup called loneliness because it's better than drinking alone type of thing. And everybody, let's be alone together. And all the pop lines, Leonard Cohen. On and on. There's a lot of songs about loneliness, right? There's an Elvis Presley song, I think, about loneliness. And sometimes it's become glorified too, for all that. So, that's a question. Are you an illuminator? Are you a walking menorah, a walking flame that illuminates people? Someone comes near you and they leave you, they always feel illuminated. They feel uplifted. They feel informed. They feel more alive. Or are you doing the opposite when you meet people? And of course the question can be turned around as well. The people that you hang around with, are you gravitating to people that illuminate you, or people that are darkening your spirits? Or there's always the third option, neither. I always believe that neither always goes into the darkening side, because if it's not empowering you, it's draining you. Actually, it's one of the first things I ever learned. I remember when I was like when you start becoming an adult, quote unquote, whatever that means, that age where you can drink or something and drive and be drafted. So I remember someone said, the first time I ever heard about what's called an office meeting. So someone said, we'll have a meeting. So I remember, I don't know, 15 years old. I mean, like a 10-year-old, 5-year-olds don't even know what meetings are. You have a class and it said, what's a meeting? So I asked somebody, like one of the senior guys, say, what is a meeting? She pulled me over and said, let me tell you, I've been at meetings for 25 years of my life, for 30 years. A meeting, you have to look at one thing. When you leave the meeting, do you feel drained or do you feel empowered? And you'll know, if you feel drained, you know it was a failure. It shouldn't be at that meeting. And if you feel empowered, you know it's a good meeting. So I always measure, every time we have a meeting, I always say to myself afterwards, okay, do I feel drained or do I feel empowered? Most meetings actually are draining, obviously, But we're not mentioning names, so there's no problem here. But to go back, illuminating. It's illuminating. And think about it, because you'll start feeling, if you feel that your responsibility is to be a walking flame, then that means that when you meet people, it's not just waiting for something to happen. You have to initiate something. You give off some light. That builds confidence, and it brings the best out of you, because you feel a responsibility. This is something we're not told. Nobody ever told us, you're responsible when you meet somebody to make them feel better. I don't mean just to serve them. I don't mean it in that sense. I meant to say, to give life, give off light. So that's another little story that Chanukah tells us. All little stories, they're very small little stories, but they actually are quite powerful ones. And then there's the second side of flame, which is that it gives off heat. It warms people. It's also a warmer. It's an illuminator and a warmer, which is really an extension of the first point. You warm up people, or you make them cold. And again, this is not about an obsession to say, okay, now whoever I'm going to meet, I'm going to say, hey, did I illuminate you today or not? I wouldn't suggest doing that. But it means it's an attitude. It's an attitude that you're here to serve. You're here to shine. You're here to radiate. Now, of course, there's times where we all need our own personal space, and there are times where we need to take care of our own needs. I'm not dismissing that. I talked about balance before. It's not all about. But the fact of the matter, healthy people who do know how to nurture themselves, they automatically then with other people, they don't have to feed off of them because they know how to feed off themselves. They will naturally be illuminators. You go to a party. Now, party season coming. You go to a party. Do you choose to gravitate to people you know, or do you choose to meet new people? Now, I know gravitating to people you know could also be two categories. You make a New Year resolution. I don't want to have anybody I know because they've all disappointed me. So I'm going to look for new people. I didn't mean it in that way. I meant if you have good friends, good people, do you gravitate? It tells you a lot about yourself. What does that mean? There's nothing wrong with being around your friends, but a person who's a little more secure and confident is more like a flame, has no problem, and sometimes actually intrigued by meeting new people, new opportunities, new challenges, new interactions, etc., etc. So there are a few stories about the flames, and there are plenty more. I'll mention a few more on the concluding note. A flame I mentioned illuminates automatically the darkness. It's a natural dispeller of darkness. So you don't need any effort. As I said before, all you got to do in a dark room, you got to bring a flame in, and automatically darkness disappears. It's a big lesson in life. Because it means that there are things you have to fight, and there's things you don't have to fight. For example, fire and water are true adversaries. Okay? Or do you say adversaries? One or the other. I think it's adversaries. What do I mean by that? Enough fire will evaporate largest bodies of water. Enough water will extinguish the biggest fire. It's just a matter of quantity. They're at war. Put fire and water together, you see what happens. It's not automatic that fire is going to be extinguished by water. You better have enough water. Light and darkness do not have that experience. You don't put light and dark near each other, there's no match. Darkness automatically will step aside. Not physically, but naturally. So it's an interesting lesson in life, and used as a metaphor in different texts for wisdom and folly. Put in a room a wise person and a fool, there's no match. Yes, a fool is pressing maybe his control of the gun, then one fool can destroy what 1,000 wise people built. But we're talking about all things equal. Well, no one has a weapon. Oh, there's no match. A wise person can manipulate, can always outsmart a fool. I'm not suggesting a fool doesn't have other strengths. That's not my point. I'm talking about when you put. Now we have inside of us. The point is made that we have a fool within us. We have a wise person within us. When you look at a situation, like they say, when a man with money meets a man with experience, what happens? The man with experience ends up with the money, and the man with the money ends up with the experience. Does this ever happen to you? Okay. If it happens too many times, then you should probably not. You should probably see somebody and find some advice. But that's what it is. A man with money, man's experience. In other words, because we have inside of us these two voices. There's a voice that's very easy that can be manipulated. We manipulate ourselves. We know something is wrong, you do it anyway. It's a voice of folly. Then there's the wise one within us that is more sober, more reflective, as opposed to impulsive. All telemarketing and all real sales is really about manipulating emotions. Meaning, to convince you that you got to do it now and get it now because tomorrow will be too late. And if you say to the person, give me a day, no, that's the worst thing because everyone knows if you sleep on it, usually the moment goes away. Well, most mistakes happen in the moment. When you flare up in anger, you respond to somebody, then later you regret it. Most mistakes, if you slept on it, or you just even delayed the decision for a little while, and you're able to calm down and not do it out of a moment of passion, a moment of excitement, a moment of whatever weakness, most decisions would be healthier. The problem is, like I said earlier, we become our own worst enemy. The fool inside of us takes control and says, we got to make a decision right now. You would never do that in any type of healthy situation. We got to review it. I'm not so sure. Why am I making the decision right now? Now, I'm not talking about an emergency situation, actual emergency. Obviously, our instincts have to tell us sometimes you have to act quickly. But many, many decisions are not that way. How many today telemarketers don't get through on the phone anymore because it's caller ID. But when they did get through, so how many people can't find the ability to say no? They say call back tomorrow, call back later, no one's home, because what are you hoping for? That they won't call back or something. Because there's a certain human nature that is just that way. Anyway, so going back to the flame automatically, naturally dispels darkness. It's a powerful tool when it comes to wisdom and reflection. The ability to look deeper into something is light. And it usually leads you to clarity. Darkness wants you to act immediately. Because confusion loves confusion. And clarity likes clarity. Clarity is like light to darkness. Clarity to confusion is like light to darkness. It's an automatic force. It doesn't need any war. The power of confusion is when you remain confused. The power of confusion is powerful when it does not have light shining, which is often the case. Many predators, many challenges, many enemies are all based on ignorance. They love to thrive in the dark. That's why in any totalitarian regimes, they needed to control the media, the press, the flow of information, because you want to control, you got to keep people in the dark. You can't let light get in there. Just like you see where the maggots and insects gather. They gather where there's moisture, but also where it's dark. You start shining light, it's like a burglar alarm. When the light shines, negative elements don't like to be there. People don't like that type of clarity, exposure. They want to be things in the dark, everything in the dark. And finally, Chanukah, we light every day, we light another additional candle, which is the lesson of growing in light. That one should always be what's called Mailan B'Kodesh. You should always increase in good things. Never stay at a plateau. So every day you add another light. You never just say, okay, I have enough. You always want to grow in clarity and in this type of the wisdom and the light that I was describing. Which means it's a life that grows. It's a life that is always blossoming. Like everything in nature grows. Healthy things grow. They don't stop. So the Chanukah teaches us about growing in that type of sense. So to go back to where I began, each of you here, everybody, has a unique, beautiful song inside you. More than one song. But it's unique to you. And you have a unique glow. And it's about time, I think, to reclaim your birthright, the thing that you were born with, the thing that is makes you tick. And I'm sure every one of us has a glimpse of it, maybe more than a glimpse at times, and I wish everybody has access to it all the time. But unfortunately, and I also speak for myself, life takes over, and sometimes you forget, and we have distractions. It's hard to measure how lack of awareness we have, but we all can use plenty of reminders. So Chanukah is a perfect holiday to help us access the flame within. So we light a flame in order to really light a flame within us. It's meant to be a reflection, a projection, and a reflection. So imagine if you're able to actually discover that song. And more than that, not just discover it, but actually know what to do to access it. So the tricks of the trade of accessing it is, number one is awareness. As I said, the biggest enemy is not aware of your own strengths. Not being aware of your own strengths is the best tool of our enemy. I remember I was in summer camp as a kid. And I played chess. I can't say I was some expert, but I was a decent chess player. But there was this guy, this arrogant guy, like a counselor, who decided he's like the best chess player on earth or something. Now, everyone said he was very good, but he was more arrogant than how good he was. That was my advantage. So nothing wrong with being arrogant, but if the arrogance is higher than your skill, then there's a blind spot. So I psyched this guy out. I remember we sat at lunch, and I said to him, they say you're good, but you don't know what the master is. So I convinced him that I'm this unbelievable master. I basically completely manipulated his mind to the point we started playing. Every move I made, every stupid move I made, I should say, he read into it all kinds of things, and he lost pretty quickly because he thought, oh wow, must be a move because he thought I was great, and it was not true. I wasn't, and I beat him, and he realized later I beat him because he made all these mistakes. But he made the mistake because he thought he was it was completely psychological warfare, which is a big part of warfare. But you learn something from that. You learn that the biggest enemy of all is not even an objective enemy. It's the enemy that you don't know your strengths. If you, for example, sitting in negotiations with someone, and they have the poker face, they completely could be bluffing you. They may have no cards in their hand, but they convince you they have all the cards. You're going to give up everything because you have no clue. There is such type of warfare. That's one of the most powerful things about what light is about. The Talmud says when Mashiach comes, at the end of days, we will see the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara will finally show its face. The Yetzer Hara is the evil inclination. It's that little mischievous voice inside you that causes you to do all kinds of stuff. You know what I'm talking about? Huh? The man with the binoculars. So, mischievous things. We don't know what this enemy looks like. What is this voice inside you that causes you to make all your mistakes in your life? What does it look like? So the Talmud says, interesting thing. When Mashiach comes, we're going to see it. It'll ride. The curtain will be open, and you'll see your enemy. And the interesting thing the Talmud says is, the righteous people will see a big, big mountain. And the wicked people who made all those mistakes will see a little anthill. So the righteous people who overcame their evil inclination will realize what kind of achievement they had. And the wicked people realize it was nothing. It didn't have any strength. It was this bluffer that convinced you that you don't have the strength, and it was able to control you, simply mind control. That's what the Talmud says. So it's an interesting statement because it's telling you that you really have unbelievable strengths, but your negative voices, how they control you is by keeping you in the dark. Like you not even know you have these strengths. And one day you discover, wow, I had those strengths. So I'm telling you now, you don't have to wait till the end of your life, or wait for 50 years or whatever amount of time. You have strengths. The material world and all its forces are on an assault on convincing you that you don't have strength. They're trying to sell you something. That if you buy this, you'll be better. If you do this, you'll be better. You don't need anybody, and you don't need anything. You have everything inside of you that you need to be a happy person. How do you like that? You don't need to pay for it. You don't need to. No one has to. It's like that story, Woody Allen joke, where the guy comes to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I hear the Torah has the answer to all the questions of life, the secrets of life, happiness." He says, "Yes." He says, "Okay, will you teach it to me?" "Of course." "How much will it cost?" He says, "How could I charge you?" God didn't charge the Jewish people when He gave them the Torah. Moses didn't charge when He taught them the Torah. How could I charge you? So the guy's doubly impressed. He's getting the secrets for free in this world. He's amazed. They sit down, they open up a Torah. Okay, it's all in Hebrew. So the rabbi says Hebrew lessons will be $10,000. That's a Woody Allen joke. There's always the double edge, the end, the punchline that you think it's going great, right? You're getting the secrets. So I'm telling you that you don't need the punchline. That's Woody Allen's punchline. The true punchline is that you have everything you need inside of you. That's the big secret. And what good teachers can do, good friends, mentors, and so on, is simply make you aware of it and help you get rid of those psychological blocks that convince you that it's formidable. Now, I'm not saying it's not easy always, because we have that, we convinced ourselves. Then we have all the reinforcing messages that keep convincing us, plus everything that shaped us. So I'm not saying it's easy. But the number of things you must know that. And Chanukah tells you are a flame, you have a unique glow, time to access it. The things to do about it is to be confident and then have objective friends help you access it and start discovering what is it that you're doing that's not letting you access it. What is it that you're doing that's blinding you? And usually we're doing plenty of things that are not contributing to your own cause. It's not contributing, it's on the contrary, blocking. So we'll sure talk about this more, but for now, let me say that everybody, as Chanukah comes, arrives next week, the end of this week, we have a opportunity to access new dimensions within ourselves, and especially being around other people who have access to this is a great way to do it. So learn the lesson from the flames, listen to their story, and definitely it will expose in you the flame within you and your unique glow, your unique voice and song. And may we all sing well together and glow together, each with our particular hue and shade and color and so on. And together we can create a rainbow and a tapestry that's far greater than the sum of the parts. So it's an honor to be part of this, it's called Symphony, part of this light show, this light and sound show. And hopefully we all can contribute to our part and complement each other. Everyone should have a very happy Chanukah. We'll keep you posted about next week because I think this location is being used, but we'll send out an email about it. So if you have not left your email, leave your email so we'll be able to be in touch. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow night, and also Tuesday night, Philip Namworth, our good old MLC's Philip Namworth, the boogie woogie mystic, as he's called, will be doing a music show with his band right here at this location, 8 o'clock next Tuesday evening. And so until next time, it's a great honor, pleasure to be here. I'm sorry? Philip will give a class, yeah. Philip will give his class at 7 p.m. And everyone, be empowered, glow, shine, celebrate, and make sure it's contagious, that you pass this on to everyone else you meet. Illuminating forces. Thank you so much.